My name is Emily. I never thought a weekend at a lakeside cabin could go so wrong. It was supposed to be a breaker chance to escape the city, unwind, and reconnect with nature. I was wrong. The moment I stepped inside the old cabin, I felt the weight of something heavy pressing down on me. It wasn't the dust, or the old, worn furniture, or the smell of mildew that bothered me. It was something deeper. A sense of being watched. I couldn't shake it, no matter where I went. The walls felt too close. The floorboards creaked under my every step, and outside, the lake stretched out endlessly, dark and deep. The first day was uneventful. I spent most of the afternoon by the water, taking in the view. But as dusk began to settle in, the calm of the lake became unsettling. The water, which had been still and glass-like all day, began to ripple without cause. The air grew colder, and a strange heaviness filled the space around me. I tried to ignore it. After all, I was alone, and I had come here to relax. But when I went back inside to prepare dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence was too thick. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every little sound seem amplified. That night, I went to bed early, hoping to sleep through the unease. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of a voice, a whisper, barely audible. I thought it was just the wind at first, but the voice was too clear, too deliberate. Emily ... I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was coming from the lake. My heart raced, and I pulled the blanket tighter around me, willing myself to ignore it. Emily, come closer ... I felt the weight of the words settle into my chest. It was a voice I didn't recognize, but it felt familiar, too familiar. I tried to close my eyes, to force myself to fall back asleep, but the whispering continued, growing louder with each passing minute. Emily, come to the lake. Something in me snapped. I couldn't resist anymore. I got up, my legs shaking. Beneath me, the cabin felt cold, the air heavy with anticipation, as if something was waiting for me. I stumbled toward the door, pulled it open, and stepped into the night. The lake was dark, almost black, the moonlight barely touching the surface. The whispering was louder now, coming from every direction, like it was all around me. Rising from the water itself, I walked toward the shore, my feet sinking into the cold earth. The closer I got, the more the voices intensified, merging into a chorus of whispers, begging me to come closer, to step into the water. I stopped, just at the edge, my toes brushing the water. The lake seemed to breathe beneath me, ripples forming without any wind to cause them. I could feel it pulling at me, beckoning me closer. Emily ... come deeper ... I stepped forward, my mind screaming for me to turn back, but my body wouldn't. Listen. The water was freezing, sending a shock through my legs as I waded in further. I could feel the pull now, stronger, as if something beneath the surface was reaching up to drag me under. Then I heard it, a sound, a deep, guttural growl coming from the lake's depths. My heart pounded in my chest as something massive stirred beneath the surface. The water churned, and I saw something huge move beneath me, its form barely visible through the murky water. Emily ... It called my name, the voice now filled with hunger, with a darkness that chilled me to my core. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs were frozen, weighed down by the water. As the creature's shape grew clearer, emerging from the depths, and then I saw its eyes. Hollow, black eyes that burned with malice. It was a face, but not human. The features were twisted, monstrous, as it surfaced, reaching out toward me with long, webbed hands. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the lake, as the creature dragged me under. My name is Sam. I should have known that a weekend getaway at a secluded lake house was a terrible idea. I'd been searching for a way to escape the noise of the city, but I never expected this place to bring me to the edge of madness. When I arrived. Everything seemed too perfect. The house was isolated, perched on the edge of a serene lake. There were no neighbors for miles, just tall trees that stretched up like silent sentinels. The air was fresh, crisp, the kind of air that cleanses the soul. But something was off. A subtle unease lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. The first night, I felt fine, even peaceful. I sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey, watching the flames dance. The lake, however, didn't seem to be as calm as the rest of the place. Its surface rippled, though there was no wind. It was as if something below the water was stirring, waiting to surface. That night, I woke to the sound of whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps the trees creaking in the dark, but it wasn't. The whispers were coming from the woods though, woods that surrounded the house. The sound was soft, like a chant, low and rhythmical, almost hypnotic. I ignored it, thinking it was nothing more than the wind playing tricks on me. But the next night, the whispers came again, louder this time, more urgent. I stood by the window, staring into the dark expanse of trees. And then, I saw them, dot figures. Shadows moving between the trunks, not quite human, not quite anything. They didn't walk, they glided, as if they were floating just above the ground. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel them watching me. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding. The air felt colder, the temperature dropping suddenly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I opened the door, but the instant my foot hit the porch, the whispers stopped. Everything was silent. Too silent. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the chilly air. I walked toward the woods, my footsteps crunching against the frost-covered ground. The moment I stepped onto the path leading into the trees, the whispers returned, but now they were clearer, louder, surrounding me. "Sam, come closer." I froze. The voice was familiar, yet foreign. It sounded like my own voice, but distorted, as if it had been twisted by the wind. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the trees. That's when I saw her, a woman, standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of the trees. Her long white dress flowed around her like mist. Her face was pale, almost glowing, but her eyes were dark, empty pits that seemed to pull at me, sucking in every ounce of warmth and life. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. The woman stepped closer, her feet never touching the ground. Her lips parted, and once again, I heard my name. "Sam, come to me." I didn't understand why, but I couldn't resist. Slowly, I took a step toward her, then another, drawn in by her presence, as if my body no longer belonged to me. The closer I got, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. The trees twisted and bent, their branches reaching toward me, like hands. I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on my back. The whispers grew louder, maddening. When I was just a few feet from her, I could feel the cold emanating from her, like the touch of death itself. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew she wasn't human. She wasn't even alive. She was something far worse. The moment I reached out to her, everything went black. "My name is Alex." I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I agreed to stay at the lake house for the weekend. A secluded place, surrounded by thick woods, far from the buzz of the city. It was supposed to be peaceful. But now, looking at the water from the dock, I realized that everything was a mistake. It started the night I arrived. The house was old, its floorboards creaking underfoot with each step. The air smelled of damp wood and rot, though the owner swore it was just the house's character. But what got my attention was the lake. It was enormous, its surface still as glass, reflecting the moonlight like a perfect mirror. Too perfect. The first night, I heard nothing. Silence, like the kind you only find in the deepest corners of the world. But by the second day, I felt a unsettling presence. Like someone was watching me from the shore, or perhaps from beneath the water. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. The second night, it became harder to ignore. I went to bed early, hoping a full night's sleep would calm my nerves. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound of soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. My heart raced, and I couldn't breathe. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. Nothing. The lake was still, but when I turned back to the window, my reflection wasn't mine. I could see myself, but not as I was. It was like someone else was inside me, staring back from the glass. I jumped out of bed, stumbling backward, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I was alone in the room, but the image in the window never left. It seemed to shift, like it was watching me, studying me, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling. The reflection, whatever it was, stayed with me as I moved through the house. Every time I passed a window, I could feel its gaze, lurking just behind my own reflection. At times, I thought I saw the figure moving, but when I turned to look, the room was always empty. The next morning, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. I hoped the fresh air would clear my mind, maybe even help me find a rational explanation. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear footsteps in the distance, always behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. Eventually, I reached the edge of the lake, where a small boat was docked. It looked abandoned, covered in algae, but something about it called to me. Without thinking, I climbed in and paddled out, hoping the isolation of the water would calm my nerves. The farther I drifted from shore, the more suffocating the silence became. The lake felt ... wrong. It wasn't just still, it was too still. The air hung thick around me, the weight of the world pressing in from all sides. I was about to turn back when I heard the softest whisper, like a voice coming from beneath the water. "Come closer." I froze. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It was a woman's voice, smooth and haunting, like it was calling me from the depths of the lake itself. "Who's there?" I whispered, my pulse racing. The water beneath the boat shifted, a ripple forming out of nowhere. Slowly, I leaned over the edge to look. The water was murky, darker, sharp contrast to its usual clarity. And then I saw it. A face. A pale, twisted face that barely resembled a human. Eyes wide and empty, locked onto mine. I yanked myself back, knocking the oar into the water, sending the boat spinning in a wild circle. My heart pounded, and I could barely breathe. The whisper came again, but this time, it was louder, more insistent. "Come closer, Alex." I turned the boat around with shaking hands, paddling as hard as I could. The water seemed to resist, pushing against me, the whisper growing louder with each stroke. My head spun. The face was still there, beneath the water, staring up at me. I didn't dare look back as I sped toward the shore. When I finally made it back to the house, my body was trembling, drenched in sweat. The lake was calm again, its surface as smooth as glass. But the whisper didn't stop. It echoed in my mind, growing louder, louder, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it in my head or from the lake itself. That night, I locked every window, bolted the doors, but sleep didn't come. The reflection returned. It was waiting for me in the glass, staring back with those empty eyes. But now, it moved. Slowly, it tilted its head to one side, and in the reflection, I saw something else, something beneath the surface. The figure. In the water, its pale hand rising, reaching for me. I'm trapped here. I can't leave. The lake won't let me go, and I know it's only a matter of time before the reflection comes for me. ... before it drags me down into the depths. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But From the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water. Cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale. Waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Adam, and I don't go near lakes anymore. I had always loved the water, which is why I agreed to house-sit my uncle's lake house for a week. It was supposed to be an easy gig-relax fish, maybe do some riding. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something metallic, almost like rust. The lake stretched endlessly before the house, black as ink. When I stood on the dock, I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, but the ripples vanished before I could be sure. That night, I woke up gasping. A voice had whispered my name. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The house was silent. The only sound the occasional creak of the wooden walls settling. But then, I heard it again, soft, wet, like a breath bubbling up through water. Adam. I grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the window. The dock was empty. The lake was still. But something about the reflection in the water was wrong. I moved closer. The surface was perfectly smooth, like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the sky, the trees, the house. But not me. My breath hitched. I waved a hand. Nothing. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. That's when I heard the first footstep, a wet, slapping sound coming from the dock. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, and my stomach twisted. A figure stood there, dripping pale, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes black voids, staring right at me. It opened its mouth, and I heard my own voice. Help me. I slammed the curtains shut and locked the door, my hands trembling. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved closer, up the porch steps. Then came the knocking, slow, deliberate. I pressed my back against the wall, barely breathing. The knocking stopped. Then, the whisper came from inside the house. Let me in. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner until the first light of dawn. When I finally gathered the courage to check the dock, it was empty. The water was still, but my footprints were there, leading from the lake to my door. I left that morning and never returned. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't want to. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear it whispering my name, calling me back to the water. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But from the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave. But the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale, waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Daniel, and I never believed in ghosts until I met my own. I had rented the lake house for a weekend retreat, hoping to disconnect from the world. The place was serene, nestled between towering pines, its wooden dock stretching over the vast lake. The first day passed uneventfully, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, an uneasy feeling crept in. That night, I woke to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was a tree branch brushing against the window, but when I sat up, I realized it was coming from below. It was faint, rhythmic, like knuckles rapping against wood. I hesitated before getting out of bed. The sound continued as I crept toward the window, peering out into the moonlit darkness. The lake was still, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the starlit sky. And then I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the dock, staring down into the water. Its posture was rigid, its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the surface. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make out any features, only a silhouette against the dark. I turned away for a split second, reaching for my phone. When I looked back, the dock was empty. The next morning, I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself it was just my imagination. I spent the day exploring the nearby trails, avoiding the dock entirely. But as night fell, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder. I clutched a flashlight and hesitantly stepped outside. The cool night air pressed against me as I made my way toward the dock. The lake was still a mirror, reflecting my hesitant steps as I peered over the edge. My reflection stared back at me. Then it blinked. My own face twisted into something unnatural, a grin stretching wider than it should, eyes dark and hollow. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The reflection moved independently, reaching out toward me from beneath the water. I ran back inside. I locked every door, every window, but I could still hear it, the tapping. Faster now, insistent. At midnight, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Then, from outside, I heard the creak of wooden planks. Something was walking on the dock. I didn't wait to see what it was. Grabbing my keys, I bolted for my car, adrenaline drowning out every rational thought. As I sped away, I caught one last look in my rearview mirror. A figure stood on the dock, watching me leave, and in the still water below, its reflection waved. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights, alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But, from the moment I arrived, something felt ... wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly. A child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing, shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale. Waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass, their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. My name is Eric, and I thought a weekend at the lake house would be peaceful. I was wrong. I arrived late in the evening, the sun just dipping below the tree line. The house was old but sturdy, perched at the water's edge like it had been waiting for me. As I stepped onto the dock, a chill ran down my spine. The lake was unnaturally still, the water black and depthless. It felt like something was watching me. That night, I awoke to a strange sound, like something heavy, scraping against the dock outside. I hesitated, then forced myself to look out the window. The lake stretched out before me, undisturbed, but then I saw it. Something was floating just beneath the surface, a pale shape, barely visible in the moonlight. It wasn't a log or debris. It was a face, eyes wide open, staring UNMOVING. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. When I looked again, it was gone. The next day, I convinced myself I had imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I felt unseen eyes burrowing into me from the water. That evening, I sat on the dock, trying to clear my mind. That's when I saw bubbles rising, breaking the surface. Something was moving beneath me. Then, a hand shot up from the water, grasping at the dock's edge. I scrambled back, my heart hammering. The hand was bloated and pale, fingers stretching toward me before slipping back into the depths. The water rippled violently, then went still. I wanted to leave, but my keys were gone. I searched frantically, overturning everything in the house. I was trapped for one more night. At midnight, the house groaned as if it were breathing. The temperature plummeted. Then came the knocking, slow, deliberate, coming from the floorboards beneath me. My blood turned to ice. The knocking grew louder, more urgent, until suddenly, the wooden planks of the floor split open with a sickening crack, and the water rushed in. Hands reached up from below, grasping, clawing, pulling me toward the icy depths. I screamed, struggling against their grip. Just as my vision blurred, the house shuddered and went still. The water was gone. The floor was intact, but the air reeked of rot and lake water. At dawn, I found my keys sitting in the middle of the dock, wet and covered in silt. I didn't question it. I ran to my car and never looked back. As I drove away, I stole one last glance at the lake house in my rearview mirror, and on the dock stood a figure, watching me leave. It had my face. My name is Jason, and I should have never stepped foot in that lake house. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 nights, alone in a secluded cabin by the water. I wanted time to clear my head, to escape from the chaos of my life. But, from the moment I arrived, something felt ... wrong. The air smelled stale, the lake too dark, too still. The house had an eerie silence, like it had been waiting for something or someone to return. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest and carried my bags inside. That night, I dreamed of water, cold, suffocating, endless water. I was sinking, pulled downward by unseen hands. When I woke, my sheets were damp, my body shivering. I chalked it up to a nightmare. The second night, I heard voices. They were faint at first, whispers, carried by the wind, just outside my window. I told myself it was the trees, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it more clearly, a child's laugh. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one should have been out there. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved toward the window and peered outside. The lake was no longer still. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no breeze. And standing at the edge of the dock was a figure, a child, motionless, staring at the water. I blinked, and he was gone. By the third night, I was ready to leave, but the lake wasn't done with me. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of water dripping. The faucet. No, it was coming from the ceiling. My stomach dropped as I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and wet. Then I heard the breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths right above me. My eyes darted to the ceiling. Dark stains spread across the wood, seeping through like something was bleeding from the floor above. But the lake house was one story. I ran as I reached the front door. The whispers grew louder, rising to an agonized wail. I glanced back, and they were there, pale, waterlogged figures stood in the reflection of the glass. Their hollow eyes locked onto me, their mouths opened, releasing a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving away. But I remember the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror. The lake was no longer empty. It was filled with them. Asterisk. My name is Daniel, and I don't know if what I saw was real or if I was losing my mind. I rented a lake house for a weekend of solitude. No distractions, no noise, just me, my thoughts, and the open water. The first day was peaceful. The second was not. It started with the mirror. The lake house had a large antique mirror hanging in the living room, positioned so you could see the water through its reflection. I barely paid attention to it till I noticed something wrong. I was standing in front of it, sipping my coffee, when I saw the lake's reflection shift. The water in the mirror wasn't still like in real life. It rippled. Something dark moved. Beneath its surface, I turned to the window. Nothing. The real lake was as still as ever. But when I looked back into the mirror, I saw her. A woman, standing at the water's edge, her back to me. She was dressed in something tattered and old, her long hair dripping wet. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly turned to the window. She wasn't there. But in the mirror, she took a step closer. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my coffee. My mind raced for an explanation. Some trick of the glass, an illusion, exhaustion. I refused to believe what I was seeing. But that night, I heard the knocking, soft, rhythmic, coming from the window facing the lake. I held my breath, heart hammering. The knocking came again. I forced myself to look. There was no one there then. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned toward the mirror. The woman was inside it now, standing within the reflection of my living room. But she wasn't just standing anymore. She was knocking. I bolted out of the house, into the freezing night. The sky was empty, the lake undisturbed, but I could still hear the knocking from inside, louder, more desperate. I ran to my car and drove until I couldn't see the lake anymore. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if she was ever real, but I do know this. When I checked my phone the next morning, I found a single new photo in my camera roll, a picture of the lake house, and, in the window, the reflection of a woman staring back at me. My name is Elliot. I should have never come to this lake house. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. My best friend Jake had inherited the cabin from his late uncle and invited me to spend a few days there. The idea of an isolated retreat by the water seemed perfect until the first night. The cabin was old but sturdy, with creaky wooden floors and a musty scent that hinted at years of abandonment. The lake stretched infinitely beyond the dock, its surface eerily still, reflecting the dense pines surrounding it. Something about the silence unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper. It came from outside, near the water. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rustling through the trees, but then I heard it again. A voice, low and mournful, calling a name I couldn't make out. I shook Jake awake. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He groaned and rolled over. "It's just the lake, man. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch. The air was thick with mist, making it impossible to see the water clearly. Then, I saw a movement by the dock. A figure, standing at the edge, staring at the lake. "Hello," I called out, my breath visible in the cold night air. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless. My heart pounded as I stepped closer. The wood of the dock groaned beneath my feet. When I was only a few steps away, the figure turned. It was a woman, her face pale and waterlogged, her hair dripping as if she had just emerged from the lake. Her eyes, empty and lifeless, locked onto mine. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled backward. The dock beneath me felt like it was shifting, tilting towards the water. The woman took a step forward, and suddenly, she was gonna vanish into thin air. But the whisper remained, echoing in my ears. I ran back inside, bolting the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried to wake Jake again, but he was in a deep, unnerving sleep. I stayed awake until dawn, every creak of the house making me flinch. The next morning, I found footprints on the dock. Wet, barefoot prints, leading from the water to where I had seen her. And then stopping abruptly, I packed my bags and left without a word. Jake stayed behind, laughing off my fears. But as I drove away, I saw something in my rearview mirror. Jake, standing on the dock, staring at the lake, and behind him, the pale figure of the woman, whispering in his ear. I never went back. My name is Aaron, and I swear to you, there is something in that lake. My girlfriend, Claire, and I had been searching for a quiet getaway when we stumbled upon the lake house listing. Secluded, peaceful, and surrounded by dense forest. It seemed perfect. We booked it for the weekend, eager for some time away from the city. From the moment we arrived, I felt uneasy. The lake was too still, the air too thick, the silence too absolute. Claire laughed off my concerns, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. That night, as we lay in bed, I awoke to the sound of splashing. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy moving in the water. I turned to Claire, but she was fast asleep. I got up, moving to the window. The moon was high, its pale glow casting an eerie reflection on the lake. And then I saw it. A hand, not floating, not sinking, but reaching out of the water, fingers curled like they were grasping for something. No, someone. My breath hitched as I took a step back. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but before I could process what I was seeing, the hand slipped beneath the surface. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that I was imagining things, that I was just tired, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the cabin sent a shiver down my spine. The next morning, Claire went for a swim. I protested, but she just rolled her eyes. "You're being paranoid," she teased before diving in. I watched from the dock, stomach tight with unease. Then she screamed. I sprinted toward the water. Claire was thrashing, eyes wide with terror. "Something grabbed me," she gasped, kicking toward the shore. I waded in, grabbing her arm and pulling her onto the dock. Her leg was bleeding, deep red spreading through the water. There were handprints on her ankle. Bruised, bony fingers imprinted into her skin. We left everything behind: our bags, our food, even my car keys. We ran barefoot through the woods until we found the nearest road, where a passing driver picked us up. When the authorities arrived, they found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No footprints except our own. The lake was still and empty, as if nothing had happened. But Claire and I both know the truth. Something lives beneath that lake. And it wants to pull you under. My name is Jack, and I've always believed in the power of a friendly smile and a warm handshake. But that belief was shattered the day I moved into my new home on Crescent Avenue. The house was everything I had hoped for: spacious, charming, and in a quiet neighborhood. It seemed perfect, or at least it did at first. My neighbors, however, were not what I expected. The house next door was large, older, and looked like something out of a Gothic novel. Its tall iron gate and ivy-covered stone walls gave it an imposing presence. The owner, Mrs. Langley, was an elderly woman who rarely left her home. I had only seen her once when she waved to me from her front porch, but something about her smile sent a chill down my spine. At first I thought I was just being paranoid. After all, she was elderly, and I told myself that it was silly to assume the worst. But then, the strange things began. It started with the invitations. At least, that's what I called them. Every morning, I would find a small, elegant envelope on my doorstep. The paper was thick, and the handwriting was neat and old-fashioned. Each invitation contained the same words: "Please join me for tea at your earliest convenience. I look forward to your company." I never saw anyone deliver them, but there they were, every single morning. The first few times, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone was playing a prank, but no one else in the neighborhood seemed to have received one. Curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I decided to accept the invitation. It wasn't like I had anything else planned, and Mrs. Langley was always so kind when we waved at each other. I walked over to her house, unsure of what to expect. When I arrived, the gate creaked open, as if it had been waiting for me. The path to the front door was lined with flowers that seemed to glow under the moonlight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The front door swung open as I approached, revealing Mrs. Langley standing in the doorway, smiling her unsettling smile. "Jack, so lovely to see you," she said in a voice that was sweet but had an odd edge to it. "Please, come in." I stepped inside, trying to hide my unease. The house was dark, save for the flickering light of candles in the hallway. It smelled of lavender and something older, like dust and time. Mrs. Langley led me into a grand parlor, where a small table was set with fine china and a steaming teapot. "Please, sit," she said, motioning to a chair opposite her. I sat down, trying to act casual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As she poured the tea, I noticed her hands were trembling slightly, her skin pale and thin. She seemed frail, but there was an intensity in her eyes that unnerved me. We chatted for a while about nothing in particular, but my mind was racing. Every time I glanced around, I saw strange things: antique portraits on the walls, old books stacked in corners, and a large, ornate mirror that seemed to reflect something I couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the conversation took a strange turn. "Do you like tea, Jack?" she asked, her smile widening. I do," I said, my voice shaking slightly. She leaned in closer, her smile never faltering. "You must drink it all, my dear. It's very important." I hesitated, but then she gave me a look that sent a shiver down my spine. I picked up my cup and drank the tea in one swift motion. It tasted strange, but I couldn't quite place the flavor. As soon as I finished, everything changed. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls shrinking. The temperature dropped, and I began to feel lightheaded. Mrs. Langley's smile grew wider, her eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome to my home, Jack," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you." Before I could react, I felt myself being pulled into a trance-like state. My body went numb, and I could no longer move. The room around me seemed to shift and twist, and I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision. Mrs. Langley's voice echoed in my ears, but I couldn't make out the words. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my own house. The room was dark, and I felt cold. It was like nothing had happened, but I knew it had. I could still taste the strange tea on my tongue, still feel the weight of the experience pressing down on me. I haven't seen Mrs. Langley since that night, but sometimes I feel her presence, waiting, and every morning, without fail, I find a new invitation waiting for me on my doorstep. But this time, I know better. I won't go back. I can't, because I'm not sure if I ever really left. My name is Lisa, and I thought I knew what it meant to be cautious. I've always been the type to be aware of my surroundings, always keeping my guard up. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered when I moved into my new house on Evergreen Road. The house was beautiful, vintage cottage with a large garden, perfect for a fresh start. It was tucked away from the busy streets, offering the kind of tranquility I needed after years of city life. My neighbors were distant, but that didn't bother me. I preferred peace, especially after everything I had been through. The house next door, however, was a different story. The family that lived there had been there as long as anyone could remember, but there was something off about them. The father, Mr. Harris, always kept to himself. His wife, Mrs. Harris, was rarely seen, and their son, Ben, was even more mysterious. He was a quiet, brooding teenager who spent all his time in his room, or so it seemed. But it was the house itself that unnerved me. The curtains were always drawn, even in the dead of summer. The windows were dark, and despite the fact that there were usually cars in the driveway, the place felt empty. It was as though no one truly lived there, just shadows and memories. One night, I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when I heard something strange, a soft thumping sound, coming from next door. It wasn't like normal noise. It was rhythmic, almost like something was being dragged across the floor. I tried to ignore it, but the sound continued, growing louder as the night went on. Curiosity got the best of me. I went outside to see if I could figure out what was causing the noise. The Harris house was dark, but I could hear the thumping clearly now. It was coming from inside the house, from the room upstairs. I decided to approach the house. Maybe something had fallen, or perhaps one of them had accidentally knocked something over. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still, no answer. I walked around the side of the house, hoping to find some sign of life. The back door was slightly ajar, and the light inside was flickering. My heart raced as I stepped through the door, unsure of what I might find. The house was eerily quiet inside, but I could still hear the thumping sound. It was now almost a pounding, as though someone was trying to break free from something. I followed the sound to the stairs and hesitated at the top. Looking down the dark hallway, I approached the first door I saw, which was slightly cracked open. As I pushed it open, I found a small, dusty room with nothing in it except for a locked door on the far wall. The thumping sound was louder now, coming from behind that door. I moved closer to the door, feeling a strange chill run down my spine. The door was old, with peeling paint and rusted hinges, but it was definitely locked. There was no key in sight. The thumping grew louder, and I could almost hear someone's voice, faintly begging for help. I tried the door handle again, but it wouldn't budge. The sound was now frantic, desperate, as if someone was trapped inside, struggling to get out. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed something, a photograph on the wall beside the door. It was a picture of the Harris family, taken years ago. In the photo, the father, Mr. Harris, stood with his wife and son, but there was something strange about it. The son, Ben, was missing from the photo. His face had been scratched out, as if someone had intentionally erased him. I turned to leave, but as I did, the thumping suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. The next day, I didn't hear the sound again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to reach out to the Harris family, knocking on their door several times, but they never answered. After a week of strange occurrences and restless nights, I decided to do some digging. I learned that Ben Harris had gone missing years ago, right around the time the family moved into the house. No one knew what had happened to him. He was simply gone. Some people whispered that he had run away. Others said something darker had happened. But no one could explain the locked room I had discovered. I haven't heard the thumping sound again. But sometimes, when the night is still, I can feel something watching me from next door. The Harris family never leaves their house, and I have a feeling they never will. I still hear the thumping at night, and I'm starting to wonder if I've become part of the story. Now, just like the locked room, I may never escape. My name is Ethan, and I'm not one to believe in ghost stories or urban legends. I've always been the logical, down-to-earth type, relying on reason to get me through life. But all of that changed the day I moved into my new house on Maple Street. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house was older, but well kept, with a large front yard and a cozy atmosphere. The neighborhood was quiet, a far cry from the hustle and bustle of the city. I thought I'd found the ideal place to settle down and escape from the stress of my old life. But there was something unsettling about the neighbor's house, the one next door. It wasn't particularly spooky on the outside, but the way it always seemed to be in shadow, even during the brightest days, made me uneasy. The curtains were always drawn, and I never saw anyone coming or going. It wasn't just at the house. was empty. It was as if no one had lived there for years, despite the fact that I could see a faint light in the upstairs window each night. It wasn't until the third night that I started noticing something strange. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when I felt its eyes on me. I glanced around the room, but there was nothing unusual. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when I saw them eyes there, in the upstairs window of the neighbor's house. Two dark eyes were staring at me. They were so deep, so black, they seemed to absorb the light around them. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I shook it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the next night, the eyes were back. And this time, they were closer. I could see a figure standing just behind the window, their face hidden in shadow. But those eyes, they were unmistakable. Every night after that, the eyes were there, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But the longer I stayed in the house, the more paranoid I became. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. The eyes were always there, even when I turned off the lights. It wasn't until I decided to confront the situation that things really started to get strange. One evening, I walked next door, determined to meet the mysterious neighbor. The house seemed even darker up close, the windows black and lifeless. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I tried the doorbell, but it was silent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check around the back of the house. That's when I saw a small window, cracked open just enough for someone to see out. But when I peered inside, the room was empty. There was no furniture, no sign of life, just dust and decay. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a faint sound. It was a whisper, so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Help me." I spun around, but no one was there. The whisper seemed to come from inside the house, from deep within its walls. My heart raced as I ran back to my own house, slamming the door behind me. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and growing fear. The eyes in the window never stopped watching. They followed me from room to room, even when I tried to leave the house. It was as if they were always there, always waiting. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things, ready to leave Maple Street behind. As I was about to drive away, I glanced back at the neighbor's house one last time, and there, in the upstairs window, were those eyes, watching me, waiting for me to leave. But what scared me the most wasn't the eyes, it was the realization that the eyes hadn't been mine the whole time. They were someone else's, someone who had been watching me, not the other way around. I haven't been back to that house since, but I still hear the whisper sometimes, drifting on the wind. Help me. My name is Sarah, and I've always been the type to stay in my own lane. I keep to myself, and I don't get involved in anyone else's business. But when I moved into the house on Birchwood Avenue, I found myself involved in something I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. The house was perfect, charming, cozy, and just far enough away from the busy part of town to offer some peace. But the neighborhood, that was a different story. It wasn't exactly friendly, and the people were all a bit distant. Still, I didn't think much of it. The neighbor next door was an older man, Mr. Donovan. He was quiet and reclusive, always keeping to himself. But there was something unsettling about his house. It was a tall, narrow building with overgrown ivy creeping up the walls. The windows were always shut, and there was an eerie sense of stillness that surrounded the place. It was late one evening when I first heard the sound of crying. At first I thought it was just a passing car, but when the noise continued night after night, I realized it was coming from Mr. Donovan's house. The crying was soft at first, almost like a whimper, but then it would grow louder, almost as if someone was in pain. It would echo through the walls, disturbing the silence of the night. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe a broken pipe, but something about it felt wrong. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The sound was louder than usual, and it was nearly unbearable. I decided to go over and see if everything was okay with Mr. Donovan. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The crying continued from inside, but it was strange. There was no movement from behind the windows, no sign of life. I hesitated for a moment, but then I turned the doorknob. To my surprise, the door creaked open. Inside, the house was dark, the air thick with dust. I called out, but the only response I got was the faint sound of crying coming from upstairs. It wasn't a normal cry. There was a desperation in it, like someone was pleading for help. I made my way up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. At the top, I found a hallway with closed doors on both sides. The crying was coming from the last door on the left. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the knob. When I opened the door, I was hit by a wave of cold air. The room was empty, except for a rocking chair that faced the corner. But as soon as I stepped inside, I heard the crying again, louder this time. It was coming from the corner, where the chair sat. I slowly approached, my breath visible in the air. When I reached the chair, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A woman, her face hidden in her hands, rocking back and forth, crying uncontrollably. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, the kind I'd only seen in pictures. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman stopped rocking and slowly lifted her head. Her face was pale, and her eyes were hollow, as though she hadn't slept in years. There was something deeply wrong with her, a sadness that seemed to consume her entire being. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice weak and hoarse. "He's coming." Before I could respond, I heard a sound behind me. I turned around, but the door had slammed shut on its own. The air grew heavier, and the temperature dropped even further. Suddenly, the woman stood up and rushed toward me, grabbing my arm with an iron grip. "You need to leave," she hissed. "He's coming for you." I pulled away, fear surging through me, but the door wouldn't open. I tried again, and this time, it flew open on its own. I stumbled out of the room, running down the stairs, and out the front door. As I looked back, I saw Mr. Donovan standing on the porch, his eyes locked onto mine. His expression was empty, lifeless, and for a moment, I saw something flash in his gaze, something dark and malicious. I ran back to my house, slamming the door behind me. The crying from next door continued that night, louder than ever, but I didn't dare go back. The woman in that room, her warnings, and Mr. Donovan's hollow eyes haunted me. I found out later that Mr. Donovan's wife had died years ago under mysterious circumstances. Some people say he never fully recovered from her death. They say he's been trying to bring her back ever since, and that the crying I heard every night was the sound of his failure. But there's one thing I'll never forget. The woman in the rocking chair wasn't Mr. Donovan's wife. It was something else. And whatever it was, I don't think it's ever going to leave. My name is Jason, and I've always been a skeptic. I don't believe in the supernatural, not even for a second. When I moved to the quiet suburb on Oakwood Lane, I was looking for peace and quiet, a break from the chaos of city life. The house I bought was charming, but the neighborhood, it felt strange from the start. Most of the houses on the block were well kept, but there was one that always gave me the creeps. The house on the corner. It had an overgrown yard, and the windows were always covered by thick curtains. I never saw anyone come or go from there, but every time I passed by, I would feel like I was being watched. I tried not to think much of it. My neighbors were friendly enough, except for the ones in that house. I would catch glimpses of shadows moving behind the curtains, But whenever I tried to visit or introduce myself, there was no response. It was like they weren't even there. One evening, when I was out for a walk, I noticed a light flickering inside that house. It was a pale, greenish glow, like the kind of light that only comes from an old, faulty bulb. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and something told me I should avoid it. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate. I walked up to the house, careful not to make a sound. The front door was slightly ajar, and the same eerie green light was spilling out from the cracks. I knocked gently, but there was no answer. I tried again, and still nothing. My hand hovered over the doorknob. It was one of those moments when you just know you shouldn't do something, but you do it anyway. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The house was silent. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. The air smelled old, like dust and mildew, but there was also something else. Something metallic, like iron. I called out, but my voice seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. I slowly moved through the house, the green light coming from a room at the back. As I approached, I could feel the temperature drop. My breath was visible in the air, despite it being warm outside. I pushed open the door, and there it was, the source of the light. A large, old-fashioned mirror stood against the wall. It was framed in tarnished silver, and the light was coming from within it, as if the mirror itself was glowing. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the reflection. I was standing in the room, but the mirror didn't reflect me. It reflected a figure, a man, wearing a black suit and standing in the exact spot where I was. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and he seemed to be smiling at me, though there was no sound. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, but the reflection didn't move with me. It stayed there, staring at me with that unsettling smile. Suddenly, I heard a voice, soft and rasping, coming from behind me. "Don't look at it." I spun around, but no one was there. The house was empty, just as it had been before. My eyes darted back to the mirror, and I saw the figure begin to move. It took a step toward me, its smile widening. "Leave now," the voice whispered again, but this time it was louder, like it was right next to me. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me as I fled into the night. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I didn't dare look back. I didn't stop until I was safely inside my own house, locking the door behind me. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked into a mirror, I felt like something was just behind me, waiting. And I couldn't get the image of that man out of my head, his hollow eyes and his terrible, twisted smile. But the worst part, I know I'm not the only one who's seen him. A few days ago, I spoke to one of my neighbors, a woman named Linda. She mentioned the house on the corner, and when I told her about the man in the mirror, she went pale. "He's been there for years," she said, her voice trembling. "No one ever goes near that house because of him. He's the neighbor who never left." My name is Emily, and I recently moved to a quiet neighborhood in the outskirts of town. The houses were all charming, with large yards and old trees lining the streets. My house was no exception, but it was the one next door that caught my attention. It wasn't the house itself, but the garden. The house seemed normal enough, an old cottage-style place, slightly overgrown with ivy, but the garden next to it was strange. The plants were unlike anything I had ever seen before. Bright flowers with vivid colors bloomed in patterns that didn't make sense. Twisting vines seemed to grow in unnatural directions, like they were reaching out, stretching towards something I couldn't see. I had never really noticed it until I moved in. But when I did, I started seeing the man who lived there. Mr. Blackwell, as he was called, was a reclusive person. He rarely left his home, but when he did, he would stare at his garden for hours. I once saw him standing in the yard, muttering to the plants as if they were alive. At first, I thought it was just an eccentricity, but then I began noticing the oddities. At night, I could hear whispers coming from his garden, soft voices floating through the air, barely audible. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and the lights in his house would be on, but he would never be visible, only the shadows moving behind the curtains. One day, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a walk in the garden, just to see what was so special about it. The moment I crossed the fence, a strange chill ran through me. The flowers were still as beautiful as ever, but now I could see that some of them had faces. Strange, contorted faces twisted into expressions of pain, anguish, and anger as I stepped further into the garden. The vines seemed to reach out to me, brushing against my skin like cold fingers. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but I couldn't turn back. Something was drawing me closer to the center of the garden. There, I found a stone statue in the middle of the flowers. It was a woman, her arms outstretched as though she were trying to embrace something or someone. The statue's face was eerily lifelike, with eyes that seemed to follow me, glowing faintly in the dark. I tried to turn away, but something stopped me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the statue. Suddenly, I heard Mr. Blackwell's voice behind me, his tone sharp and accusing. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, but there was no sign of him. The garden felt alive, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stumbled backward, panic rising in my chest. The plants seemed to lean toward me, their petals curling inwards, like they were closing in. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, and I heard whispers growing louder. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find Mr. Blackwell standing there, his face twisted in an expression of fury. "You've seen too much," he hissed. "Now you're part of it." Before I could react, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and the plants started to twist and rise. The vines shot up, wrapping around my legs and pulling me down toward the ground. I screamed, struggling to break free, but the more I fought, the tighter they became. "You shouldn't have come to the garden," Mr. Blackwell whispered, as the earth swallowed me whole. "Now you'll never leave." The last thing I saw, before I was consumed by the darkness, was the face of the statue, its eyes still watching, still waiting. My name is Luke, and I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I was the kind of person who needed solid evidence before I would entertain any wild ideas. That all changed the day I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. The house had been on the market for months, and I couldn't understand why. It was a beautiful, well-kept place, but it had this aura of mystery surrounding it. Still, the price was right, and I was eager to start fresh in a new town. So I didn't think twice before signing the papers. My neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, was an older woman who lived next door. She was kind enough, always giving me advice on the best places to visit in town. But one day, as I was out front mowing the lawn, she approached me with a strange warning. "You should be careful, Luke," she said, her voice low and serious. "The house you bought, it's been vacant for a long time for a reason. People say it's cursed. Don't go down into the basement." I laughed it off, thinking it was just some old town superstition. "Thanks for the heads up, Mrs. Wilkins, but I'm not one to get spooked by stories." But the more I settled into the house, the more I began to notice strange things. The house creaked at night, the floors groaned, as if something was moving in the dark. And the basement door, it always seemed to be slightly ajar, as if it was inviting me to go down. The basement had an old, rusted lock, but it was broken. The door would swing open by itself sometimes, and I could hear faint whispers coming from below. I tried to ignore it, but one night, my curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check it out. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dark, with only the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. The walls were lined with old, forgotten furniture, boxers, and cobwebs. But in the far corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. An old man sitting in a rocking chair. At first I thought I was seeing things, but as I got closer, I realized he was real. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes were wide and empty, like they had seen too much. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at me. I froze, unable to move or speak. Then, with a voice that seemed to come from all around me, he whispered, "Leave this place, before it takes you too." The words echoed in my mind, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as the basement grew colder. I turned to run, but the stairs were gone. The basement had changed, was now a maze of twisting corridors, dark and suffocating. The man's laughter filled the space, sending a chill down my spine. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "Now you're mine." I ran in a blind panic, crashing through the darkness. The sound of footsteps followed me, getting closer and closer. I could feel his cold breath on my neck. I turned corners, but every time I did, the walls seemed to close in on me, pushing me toward the same place, the chair where he waited. Finally, I stumbled out of the basement, gasping for air, my body shaking with terror. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my mind racing. What had I seen? Was I losing my mind? But when I looked through the basement window, I saw something that made my blood run even colder there. In the window was the old man, staring back at me with those empty eyes. From that night on, I could never shake the feeling that he was still there, watching, waiting for me to return. And every now and then, when the wind howls through the house, I hear the creak of a rocking chair moving gently in the dark. My name is Sarah, and I've always been a people person. When I moved into my new home, I was eager to meet my neighbors and settle into the community. Most of the houses on my street were nice, but the house next to mine had always intrigued me. It was smaller, almost like an afterthought, tucked away behind a tall fence with a weathered gate that creaked every time it opened. I didn't know much about my neighbor, Mr. Carter. He was an older man, rarely seen, and when he did appear, it was always at strange hours. I would occasionally hear footsteps in his yard at night, but no one ever came or went from his house during the day. It was as though he lived in his own world, isolated from the rest of us. One day, while I was out watering my garden, I noticed something odd. The door to his house, which I had always assumed to be locked, was slightly ajar. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked closer to take a look. The door creaked as it moved just enough to reveal the dark interior of his home. The faint smell of mildew and something rotting seemed to leak from the crack. I couldn't resist. I gently pushed the door open a bit further. The inside was dim, and I could barely make out shapes through the grime on the windows. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been untouched for years, but there was something unsettling about it. A coldness that seeped into my bones. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped closer to the door, listening for any signs of movement. But the house was eerily silent. I was just about to step inside when I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around and saw Mr. Carter standing there, his eyes wide with a strange urgency. "Mr. Carter," I stammered, caught off guard. I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought the door was open. He gave me a sharp look, his face pale and tired. "It's not safe. You shouldn't be here. Not now." Before I could ask him what he meant, he grabbed the door handle and slammed it shut, locking it with a force that made the entire house rattle. I backed away, trying to process what had just happened. Was he trying to warn me? Or was something else going on behind that door? Over the next few days, I tried to forget this strange encounter, but every time I looked at Mr. Carter's house, it seemed like something was different. The house looked darker, like the shadows inside had deepened, and sometimes I thought I could hear soft murmurs coming from within, almost like whispers. One evening, after another strange occurrence at his house, I couldn't resist any longer. I had to know what was behind that locked door. I grabbed a flashlight and waited until midnight, when the street was empty and quiet. The gate creaked as I entered Mr. Carter's yard, the old wood groaning under my weight. I crept up to the door and tried the handle. It was locked, just as I expected. But I noticed something else. There was a small window on the side of the house, partially hidden by ivy. I could just barely make out the outline of the window frame and a small opening at the top. I climbed up, heart racing, and peered inside. What I saw chilled me to the core. The room was filled with old furniture, broken chairs, dusty shelves, and piles of strange, old books. But the most disturbing thing was the wall. The entire wall was covered in what appeared to be symbols, strange, intricate patterns, some of them scrawled in what looked like blood. In the center of the wall was a large, ornate door, one that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I backed away from the window. My mind was racing. What had Mr. Carter been hiding? What was behind that door? Suddenly, the window above me slammed shut, and I heard footsteps inside the house. My heart nearly stopped as I scrambled to the ground, my breath caught in my throat. I knew I had to leave before Mr. Carter caught me there, but as I turned to run, I felt a hand grab my shoulder, pulling me back. "You shouldn't have seen it," Mr. Carter whispered in my ear, his voice trembling with fear. "Now you're part of it." My name is Jack, and I recently moved into a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The house was perfect for me, tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac with a large backyard. It was exactly what I needed after years of living in busy, cramped apartments. Everything about the place felt peaceful until I met my neighbor. Mrs. Gray was an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from mine. At first, she seemed sweet enough, always smiling and waving when I passed by, but something about her house unsettled me. It was old and dilapidated, with overgrown ivy crawling up the sides and windows that were always shut tight. No matter how hot it got outside, it wasn't long before I began noticing strange things happening around her house. One evening, as I was walking back from the store, I saw a shadow move behind one of her upstairs windows. I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just the wind or a trick of the light. But the next day, as I drove past, I saw the same shadow again. This time, I was sure someone or something was in there. The feeling of unease grew stronger with every passing day. I started to see strange figures standing in her yard at night, always just out of sight when I tried to look directly at them. But when I went over to check on her, she would always be sitting on her porch, knitting, with an almost vacant expression on her face. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to speak with her. One evening, I knocked on her door, and she opened it slowly, as if she had been expecting me. Her pale blue eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jack, isn't it?" she asked in a raspy voice. "How can I help you?" "I've been noticing some strange things around your house," I said, trying to sound casual. "Shadows, figures moving around." Her lips curled into a thin smile. "You've seen them too," she murmured. "The others. They like to play tricks on the living." I laughed nervously, unsure of whether she was joking or not. "What do you mean? Are you saying there's something in your house?" She nodded slowly. "There's something in this neighborhood. Something old. Something that has always been here. But don't worry, Jack. It won't harm you, as long as you don't disturb it." The air grew thick with an unspoken tension as I stood there, trying to make sense of her cryptic words. Before I could ask her anything else, she turned and walked back into her house, Closing the door behind her, I left feeling disturbed, but tried to brush it off. That night, however, the shadows outside her house grew darker, and the whispers in the wind seemed to call my name. I couldn't sleep, and by dawn, I was staring out my window, watching Mrs. Gray's house. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and cloaked, stood in her yard, staring directly at me. It was like it was waiting for me to make a move, daring me to step outside. I froze, too afraid to blink, too afraid to breathe. I couldn't take my eyes off it. And then, the figure started to move closer to my house, dragging its long, flowing cloak across the grass. The closer it got, the colder the air became. My heart raced as I backed away from the window, my mind screaming at me to get out, to run, to do anything. But my body wouldn't obey. The figure reached the edge of my yard, and then stopped, standing motionless. Then, it turned its head slightly to the side, as if it were watching something else, something behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, and when I turned back to look at the figure, it was gone. I don't know if it was a dream, or if I was losing my mind, but the next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It was from Mrs. Gray. "Stay away from the shadows, Jack. They are not what they seem. They will follow you home." I never saw Mrs. Gray again. The house stayed empty, and the shadows grew darker with each passing night. But every now and then, when I look out my window, I swear I see a figure standing in the yard across the street, waiting for me to make my next move. I'm Emily, and I moved into a new neighborhood just a few months ago. The house was everything I had dreamed of: charming, a little old-fashioned, and quiet. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my new neighbor, Mr. Collins, wasn't quite as harmless as he seemed. At first, I noticed little things, strange noises coming from the house next door late at night. The faint sound of something dragging across the floor, or the way the blinds in his window never seemed to move. I chalked it up to the quirks of an older man living alone. But it wasn't long before my curiosity got the best of me. One evening, I was outside on my porch when I saw him, a thin, hunched figure moving behind his curtains. I waved, but he didn't respond. His house was old, like mine, with an attic that seemed to always be locked. But on that night, I noticed something odd. The attic window was open just a crack, and the silhouette of a figure was standing there, staring out at me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he had visitors, or it was just a trick of the light. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences grew more intense. I started to hear soft tapping on my walls at night, as though someone was trying to communicate from the other side. The tapping always seemed to follow the rhythm of Mr. Collins's footsteps, always on the same days. At the same time, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding in my chest. When he answered, his cold eyes met mine, and I felt an unsettling shiver crawl down my spine. "What can I do for you, Miss Emily?" he asked, his voice too smooth. "Well, I was wondering if you could explain the noises coming from your house." ISTAMMERED. Mr. Collins gave a quiet chuckle, but there was something in it that didn't feel right. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that," he said, "but you'll learn soon enough." Before I could ask him what he meant, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned, and made my way back home, the eerie feeling growing stronger with every step. That night, the tapping was louder than ever, but this time, it wasn't coming from my walls, it was coming from the attic. I tried to ignore it, but the noises grew more frantic. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. In a panic, I grabbed my phone and tried calling Mr. Collins, but his line was disconnected. As I stood in the middle of my living room, trying to figure out what to do, I heard a voice, a low whisper that sent a wave of ice through my veins. "Come upstairs." Without thinking, I found myself at the bottom of the stairs that led to my attic. The door was cracked open, just enough to let a sliver of light spill through. My breath caught in my throat, as I reached for the handle, but I hesitated. Something told me not to open that door, but my feet moved before my mind could catch up. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The attic was freezing, colder than any place I had ever been. The air smelled damp, and I could barely see through the haze of dust. But there, standing in the corner, was Mr. Collins. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his body was contorted in an unnatural way. He spoke again, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. In his place stood a figure, one that looked exactly like me, but its eyes were black as coal, and its grin stretched unnaturally wide. I screamed, but no sound escaped my mouth. As I looked around the attic, I realized that I wasn't alone. Mr. Collins wasn't the only one trapped here, and now, neither was I.